There are abandoned places all over the entire world, whether due to collapse, evacuation, or money shortage. These places still remain and are the perfect location for urban explorers. However, some of these locations are too scary even for the bravest of people. So today on Top 5 Scary Videos, I'm going to be counting down our list of the top 5 scary abandoned buildings you should never enter. Before we begin though, be sure to stick around until the end of the video where I'll be responding to some of your comments. And with that, let's jump in. Coming in at 5, Hashima Island, Japan. Hashima Island is an abandoned island lying about 15 kilometers from the city of Nagasaki in southern Japan. It is one of 505 uninhabited islands in Nagasaki Prefecture. The island's most notable features are its abandoned concrete buildings, undisturbed except by nature and the surrounding sea wall. While the island is a symbol of the rapid industrialization of Japan, it is also a reminder of its history as a site of forced labor prior to and during the Second World War. The island reached a peak population of 5,259 in 1959, and in 1974, with the coal reserves nearing depletion, the mine was closed and all of the residents departed soon after, leaving the island effectively abandoned for the following 3 decades. Interest in the island then re-emerged in the 2000s on account of its undisturbed historic ruins, and it gradually became a tourist attraction. The island is increasingly gaining international attention, not only generally for its modern regional heritage, but also for the undisturbed housing complex remnants representative of the period from the Taisho period to the Showa period. It has become a frequent subject of discussion among enthusiasts for ruins. Since the abandoned island has not been maintained, several buildings have collapsed mainly due to typhoon damage, and other buildings are in danger of collapse. However, some of the collapsed exterior walls have been restored with concrete. The island was formally approved as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in July 2015 as part of Japan's sites of Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution, iron and steel, shipbuilding, and coal mining. In at 4, Eastern State Penitentiary, Pennsylvania. The Eastern State Penitentiary, also known as ESP, is a former prison in Philadelphia that was operational from 1829 until 1971. The penitentiary refined the revolutionary system of separate incarceration first pioneered at the Walnut Street Jail, which emphasized principles of reform rather than punishment. Notorious criminals such as Al Capone and bank robber Willie Sutton were also held inside its innovative wagon wheel design. Originally, inmates were housed in cells that could only be accessed by entering through a small exercise yard attached to the back of the prison. Only a small portal, just large enough to pass meals, opened onto the cell blocks. The design in turn proved impractical, and in the middle of construction, cells were constructed that allowed prisoners to enter and leave the cell blocks through metal doors that were covered by a heavy wood door to filter out noise. Some believe that the doors were small so prisoners would have a harder time getting out, minimizing an attack on a security guard. Others have explained the small doors forced the prisoners to bow while entering their cells. This design is related to penance and ties to the religious inspiration of the prison. The prison was one of the largest public work projects of the early Republic and was a tourist destination in the 19th century. Visitors spoke with prisoners in their cells, proving that inmates were not isolated, though the prisoners themselves were not allowed to have any visits with family or friends during their stay. The prison is now abandoned, however it operates as a museum and historic site, open year-round. However, those who have visited have noted a weird presence inside its walls, and it is said that its former inmates haven't quite left the building yet. In at number 3, Aniva Rock Lighthouse, Russia. The Aniva Lighthouse was built by the Japanese in 1939 on a chunk of rock off the southern coast of Sakhalin just east of Russia. The island was largely uninhabited until the 1800s when both Japan and Russia became interested in annexing it. A ring of lighthouses were built on Sakhalin's rocky coast to signal incoming troop carriers and merchant ships. After around 50 years of sharing the island, the Russians annexed it all in the Second World War, causing 500,000 Japanese to be evacuated back to Hokkaido. In 1951, the Treaty of San Francisco was signed, officially handing tenure over to the Russians. Now the Aniva Lighthouse is abandoned, including its 7 stories of diesel engines, accumulator rooms, keepers' living spaces, radio facilities, storerooms, large clockwork pendulum, and 300 kg pool of mercury. The place now looks like the perfect location for a horror movie, with the building completely deteriorating upon the rock due to the force of the water and wind. However, if you want to visit, you can. Regular tours are organized from Sakhalin's main city. During the 6-day journey, tourists can not only visit the lighthouse but also enjoy the views of the city. Coming in at number 2, Willard Asylum, New York. The Willard Asylum for the Chronic Insane is a former state hospital in Willard, New York near Seneca Lake. The asylum was originally meant to rescue mentally ill people from county facilities where they were typically kept, often chained up or in cages. At Willard, the idea was that patients could be treated and hopefully rejoin society. In reality, Willard was more of a prison than it was a hospital, with patients being kept until the administrators decided they could leave. However, many never did. Worse still, not everyone who found themselves in the asylum were actually insane. Now, as of today, Willard is abandoned, but much of it still remains. The bowling alley built inside its walls during the later years is still standing, with several decaying pins remaining at the end of the lanes. The morgue is also still intact, with the autopsy tables in place next to the drawers where the bodies were stored. Now, in those days when a person died, it was shameful to have one's family name on the grave of a mental hospital. As such, out of respect, none of the graves were marked. Today, efforts are underway to find out who is buried in the graves and replace numbers with names. In the attic is where things have been unearthed though. In 1995, the same year the asylum closed, hundreds of suitcases were discovered in the attic. They had been left behind by the patients who never left the asylum. More than half of the 50,000 patients that came to Willard died within its walls, making this building one of the scariest in history. Finally, coming in at number 1, Pripyat, the Chernobyl abandoned city. Yes, we're discussing an entire city with this one, not just one specific building, because honestly there are way too many. Pripyat is a ghost city in northern Ukraine, near the Ukraine-Belarus border. The city was founded on February 4th, 1970 as the 9th nuclear city in the Soviet Union to serve the nearby Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It was officially proclaimed a city in 1979 and had grown to a population of 49,360 by the time it was evacuated on the afternoon of April 27, 1986, the day after the Chernobyl disaster. The Chernobyl disaster was a nuclear accident that occurred on the 26th of April 1986 at the number 4 nuclear reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant near the city of Pripyat in the north of the Ukrainian SSR. It is to this day considered the worst nuclear disaster in history and is one of only 2 nuclear energy disasters rated at 7, the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Event Scale. The accident began during a safety test on an RBMK type nuclear reactor, which was commonly used throughout the Soviet Union. During this test, a large amount of energy was suddenly released, vaporizing superheated cooling water and rupturing the reactor core in a highly destructive steam explosion. This was immediately followed by an open-air reactor core fire that released considerable airborne radioactive contamination for about 9 days that precipitated onto parts of the USSR and Western Europe before finally being contained on May 4th, 1986. Due to the radiation left behind, the entire city was evacuated, and all that remains are the abandoned buildings and a haunting Ferris wheel standing motionless in time. It had been scheduled to have its official opening 5 days after the disaster, in time for May Day celebrations. The Azure swimming pool and Avanhard Stadium are 2 other popular tourist attractions. You can only stay there 2 hours, otherwise you die. Well, there we have it. You guys agree with our list? Were there any abandoned places that we missed? Leave us all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below and perhaps we can do a part 2. Before I go though, I just want to respond to a few comments from one of our last videos. Top 5 scary Irish urban legends. Leonard Jordan said, "Lucy, you're an absolute gem of a lady and presenter. Thank you so much for covering my home country. Much love and respect." You're very welcome. I didn't choose the topic, but you're welcome. Came from my heart. Wingy158 said, "Someone hit Lucy's funny bone in this episode. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm adoring her laugh. Don't worry, I will never laugh again. It was a one-time thing." The Gaming Gumdrop said, "Oiland." You know the way to my heart. Ancestor Empire said, "2 things more scary than seeing ghosts, Lucy, at 2 AM. Seeing the gallows 2 and cats in one night. I no longer fear death." I'm sorry that you went through that. That's quite tragic. And on that note, if you haven't already, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another scary vid. And until next time, see you later. Has now been maintained. not been maintained. I think I've got the coronavirus. If I say it with confidence, it's fine. Why did I put the date? That was weird.